Hello.
Hi there.
In this video, I'm going to be reflecting on an incident that happened to me tonight and discussing my thoughts about a particular issue, which I'll get to in a second. I just wanted to note that this is my third unscripted video on this channel.
And to your credit, you're a hell of a lot better at doing videos unscripted than I am.
Okay, so here's what happened. I got invited out to have a drink with a friend of mine, and when I turned up, there was a guy there who I'd met once before and didn't much like because he made sexist remarks.
Here we go.
And, said stuff that I just generally felt was distasteful, and I just didn't get along with him. I didn't know this guy was going to be there. My friend hadn't mentioned that. I don't know if he knew he was going to be there or whatever. But if I had known this guy was there, I probably wouldn't have gone at all. But that doesn't really matter. I'll get on with it. Okay, so at one point in the conversation, I should note that the guy in question was quite drunk tonight and hadn't had a very good day and seemed quite tense and was a little unsettled. We were talking about an incident that I remember reading about a long time ago, I think it was in the late 90s, about Tarantino being in a nightclub or a bar one night and punching a woman in the face. And I don't even know if this story is actually true or if it's apocryphal, but my memory of the story, how it went, is that Tarantino was taking a swing at the woman's boyfriend and hit her by mistake. That's what he said. And my memory is that the boyfriend and the girlfriend said no, he was actually meaning to punch the woman in the face.
Well, my friend, I'm afraid you're incorrect on that one. Allow me to enlighten you. What really happened is that Tarantino was hanging out with this guy in a restaurant in New York. They were talking about representation of black people in Hollywood movies. The guy said to Tarantino that he was shocked at the idea of white audience members accepting super dark-skinned lead actors like Wesley Snipes. Tarantino got pissed off at the guy's racist remark, and then it quickly escalated into a fist fight. Tarantino threw a punch, the guy ducked, and his girlfriend was the one who got punched instead of him. Tarantino never claimed that he was trying to punch the woman, only her boyfriend.
Like I said, I don't even know if this story is true, let alone whose side of it's true, if it is true. But anyway, that's what we were talking about. And when I mentioned that Tarantino had supposedly hit this woman in the face, this guy said, "Good on him," or "sounds like a good thing," or something like that. He made a positive remark about it, which I found extremely distasteful. I found quite bizarre and misogynistic and just terrible thing to say. But I moved on. I didn't respond to it, I just let it slide, because, I don't know, I just wanted to be pleasant and have a civil conversation. I didn't want to get worked up by this fucking guy.
Something tells me that you would eventually end up getting annoyed or agitated by him regardless.
Anyway, later on, he starts having a go at me about something totally different. Sort of a personal jab at me, I'm someone he's met twice. I don't really know why he decided to take a jab at me, but anyway. I'm not going to mention exactly what he said because it gives away some personal details about me that I don't really want to give out. But needless to say, it was something that pissed me off. I also let that one slide and didn't say anything back. Then he said a third thing. He was at this point being kind of confrontational to me. Everyone who was present at the time sort of felt that. There was quite a tense atmosphere. He said to me, "Do you like Brazilian pussy?" My response to that was, "I don't like the word pussy." And then when he snickered at me after I said that, I responded to that by saying, "I also don't like misogynists like you." Then he said, "I don't like being called things I'm not." Well, it was at this point I brought up what he said when we were talking about Tarantino in that bar punching that woman. And his response to me bringing this up was to say, "It was just a joke." And this is what I want to talk about with this video, the whole "it was just a joke" defense strategy.
Man, I'm not making any assumptions here, but you seem like you've led a very coddled and sheltered life. A lot of times when I've gone out with friends to places, a guy joking about hitting women and getting Brazilian pussy is pretty mild and tame compared to everything else you'll hear people say. I've heard some really hardcore stuff in my time. If the guy was bugging you that much, then why not simply just sit somewhere else? Go somewhere else. Tell your friend that you're not enjoying his company. If I was in a public place like that and encountered someone who was that unpleasant, I would have avoided him like the plague.
It was just a joke defense strategy that people use when someone calls them out on saying some shitty thing. Well, in my opinion, the "it's just a joke" defense is bullshit. I don't buy it for a second. I've never bought it. And in that conversation, what I said back to that was that I don't make jokes like that, and the other people present at that conversation didn't make jokes like that.
You are aware that humor is a very broad and diverse medium, right? Just because you and the people you associate with don't make crude jokes, it doesn't mean that they aren't jokes at all. That's kind of an arrogant attitude to adopt.
Because we don't have messed up attitudes towards women in our heads. I would never make a joke like that because it's just not in me to do that. And then I asked him if he would make jokes about Jews being pushed into ovens. And his response was, yeah, I probably would. And he said something about, the fact that he's British and it's the British mentality, the British sensibility, is to make that kind of thing, is to view that kind of thing as a joke and just make crass jokes and stuff like that. He has a bit of a point, but I responded to that by saying that the British comedy style, generally, from what I've observed, is to not punch down, is to punch up and to punch sideways, and to punch yourself, is to use self-deprecating humor. They don't generally tend to punch down. And in my experience, the people who generally punch down are conservative comedians in America.
So I take it you've never heard of Ricky Gervais, Sacha Baron Cohen, Jimmy Carr, or Frankie Boyle?
And my friend who invited me out to drink was getting kind of frustrated about the way the conversation was going, that it was getting quite hostile, it was getting extremely tense, and so I decided to drop it. Because this kind of stuff makes me extremely irritated, and it could have escalated into something really bad, and I didn't really feel like, getting involved in something like that. It reminded me of, in my last video, Stand Up for Women, one of the speakers said, don't tolerate rape jokes and sexist jokes and stuff. I don't know if she actually said sexist jokes, but she definitely said rape jokes. Specifically in the workplace, don't tolerate people saying shitty stuff in the workplace. And, we weren't in a workplace, obviously, we were having a drink at a bar, but I think the same sort of thing applies.
No, it doesn't. When you're at work, you're being paid to represent whatever business it is that you work for in the best way possible. When you're at a bar, you generally go there to get wasted and be yourself. So, yeah, very different principles.
And I was thinking about it when I was on my way home after I left. And I was thinking that, people who make those kinds of jokes, in my experience, their views are quite deeply entrenched, and they generally can't really be reasoned out of having those kinds of views.
Ironic, because they also think the same thing about you.
Those sexist kind of views. The viewing women as objects thing, which saying, do you like Brazilian pussy? That's obviously viewing women as objects to some degree.
So, you're saying that just because a guy was drunk, and he said a bunch of sexist shit to you, that he is, in fact, a bona fide sexist, whether drunk or sober. I mean, that's the exact way you're framing that statement.
To be able to frame a question like that, which I would just never do.
Framing women as objects is not the same as misogyny. You can have favorable preferences towards an object. You really need to stop putting women as objects and misogyny in the same sentences together.
To frame women as a means to sex, and that's it.
I don't suppose you ever considered why he would say things like that, did you? Normally, people don't just say sexist things because they can. A lot of the times, they've been mistreated or badly hurt by women, and they may say things like that to vent out their negative emotions. That's what I mean by being arrogant. Just because a guy says a bunch of sexist shit to you doesn't automatically make him a sexist. It could just be a coping mechanism. You shouldn't make assumptions or presume to know people based on a few things that they said, especially if they were inebriated.
Obviously, he doesn't just think of them that way, but he framed that question that way.
But you just said he has sexist and misogynistic beliefs. I mean, does he view women as sex objects or not? Pick one.
It's not the same to say, do you like Brazilian pussy, as to say, do you like having sex with Brazilian women? That's not the same.
How, Garrett? How is it not the same?
I mean, I guess you could say that the intent may have been the same, but it doesn't come across the same way.
Why? How? As an individual with subpar social skills, I would find it very educational if you actually went into detail about how these two statements appear differently.
Now, don't get me wrong, I do think that calling out rape jokes and sexist jokes and stuff is important, especially in the workplace and just in social scenarios in general, social situations, because it's important to let people know that That stuff's not okay.
So I guess you don't much care for the idea of free speech, huh?
You're probably not going to change people's views, but you can change the social dynamic, change the way people talk, change the things that are considered acceptable one step at a time.
If you're not going to change people's views, then how are you going to change what is considered acceptable? You see, this is one of the crippling problems with liberals like yourself. None of the problems that you talk about are legitimate, crystal clear desecrations of justice. You talk about the most subjective, arbitrary things, and yet then you try to blow them up to be these major societal epidemics. Just because you find people saying things like, "Do you like Brazilian pussy?" to be offensive, it doesn't mean that everyone else should find it offensive and strive to make it so people can't say what they want to say. It's because of these things that people will compare liberals to fascists or to Big Brother, because anything can be offensive to you people. Whether it's manspreading, all lives matter, or people simply disagreeing with you.
It did change the atmosphere at the gathering, and it made me feel extremely uncomfortable. More uncomfortable, I think, than I would have felt if I hadn't called him out on it. I don't know, it's hard to say. And I think I pissed my friend off by bringing it up.
Well, man, I hate to say this, but I don't really blame your friend for being pissed off. To be honest, you didn't really handle the situation very well. If the guy was bothering you that much, then the right thing to do would have been to talk to your friend privately, express your issues, and decide what to do next. Instead, you just bottled up all your anger, annoyance, and resentment, and later on you just let it all out and ended up making a scene. Now, I'm not claiming that the guy who vexed you was innocent. He does sound like he was being a very abrasive, obnoxious prick. But in my opinion, you were both at fault to certain degrees.
It didn't lead to anything good, anyway. So, it made me think about both how bullshit the "it was just a joke" defense is, and, the whole question of, how to deal with people saying shitty things in social situations like that. How do you deal with it?
Well, there's a multitude of decent ways to deal with it. As I said before, you could simply go somewhere else. You could strengthen your mental and emotional fortitude so you don't care as much about people saying things that could be viewed as offensive. You could talk to the guy in private about your problems and you could both reach a compromise. I mean, it's not really a complicated problem.
So I wanted to make this video really to generate conversation. I want to create a discussion on this topic. How do you deal with this stuff?
An SJW supporter who actually encourages debate and discussion? Get the fuck out of here.
What do people think about the "it was just a joke" defense? Do you think that's legitimate? And how do you deal with these kinds of interactions with people? Another thing I wanted to touch on was his assertion that he's not a misogynist. As I've mentioned in other videos on my channel, almost no one with misogynistic views is happy with the label misogynist. It's like racists. Most of them don't accept the term racist. They don't want to be called racist. They don't want to be known to be racists. And this is because, racism and misogyny are not acceptable in our culture.
Or it could be that they really aren't misogynists. Maybe they don't want to be called misogynists because they don't actually hate women. They just hate a specific thing about women.
This is a sort of widespread understanding that these views are harmful and negative, and if you label yourself with the term misogynist and racist, people are going to have a negative view of you, and your views are going to be self-marginalized. And generally, people understand this, so they won't go for that. They'll reject the label of misogynist or racist. So to me, him saying he's not a misogynist is utterly meaningless. It doesn't mean anything that he would say he's not that.
Well, dude, who the fuck are you to decide what people are or are not? I've tried really hard to be calm and professional throughout this video, but this was a real piece of shit thing to say. Just because you've seen someone act like a dipshit while they were drunk, that doesn't give you the right to analyze them as something without even knowing them personally. My respect for you is really starting to diminish.
It's not up to him. It's up to the people around him to judge what he says and does.
What other people? The people in the bar with you? Or the people who know him personally?
You can't see inside his mind like he can, but he's not likely to be honest about that if he is a misogynist. So, from my point of view, the best judge of that is other people. And the other side of this is that people with misogynistic views, just like with racist views, they feel that their views are acceptable. They feel that their opinions on these issues are fine, and because they justify it to themselves by whatever means.
So you're acknowledging that you don't know the guy, you've only seen him and talked to him when he was drunk, but you're still going with the assertion that he has misogynistic views. That makes no sense.
So they'll say things like, "Oh, this particular thing I said isn't misogynistic," because to them, maybe it isn't. So this is another reason why I think that the individual is not a good judge of what they are or what they aren't in this realm.
Yeah, I don't completely agree with that. Sure, an individual can lie about what they are, or they can defensively lie about what they aren't. But that same individual also has the potential to change themselves for the better. Let's assume that the guy you confronted was, in fact, a hardcore misogynist. A guy who violently assaults women and generally does everything in his power to disadvantage women. Let's say he reaches a crucible in his life that causes him to utterly change his opinions and his outward attitude towards women. He turns his life around and suddenly he's a gentleman. Would you claim that he doesn't have the right to classify himself as a gentleman? Or that he doesn't have the right to label and condemn who he was before? I mean, this opinion of yours, it works both ways. Yeah, you can say people shouldn't classify themselves as something they aren't, or deny that they aren't something they are. But what about when they're being truthful? Where does this standard of yours end?
This is another thing I'd like to get some conversation going about. What do you think about this? Do you think the word of the person themselves should be listened to? Atheism is Unstoppable regularly says he's not racist, but it's pretty obvious to almost everyone who isn't a racist that he is a racist.
And your proof of this?
Okay, well, I think that's all I had to say. Looking forward to hearing people's comments, and I hope this gets a good discussion going.
Well, in all honesty, I've already said everything I can possibly say. So I'm just going to end my video right here. Thank you all for watching, be safe, and hunt well.